The Perfect Angle. Short story. By Joshua A. Gallego. Prologue. We are all just part of a plan that was designed for you and me. In life there are three types of people: leaders, followers, and the rare rebel. The rebel was born from seeing the world from his or her own point of view. Other people's mistakes are merely a part of the making of the rebel's personality and beliefs. Out of turmoil the rebel emerges from the negative environment that he has endured. The rebel isn't blinded or persuaded, they don't let outside problems distract their vision. This is a story of a rebel that wanted to rid the emptiness that he felt inside. Many psychologists had tried to help him but they never reached him. He would always have a hole that he could never fill. Society likes to study the faults and abnormal behavior of an individual that blends in so easily. Professionals are fascinated by the rebel's motivation and drive. The rebel is like an artist, their work isn't done until they're dead or burnt out from the bouts of depression that they suffer. This artist was seeking peace but forgot why he had started in the first place. No matter how many times he continued his work, he couldn't achieve perfection. Chapter 1, Figure Me Out. Gary Mackenzie sat down in a cold holding cell. The walls were white and the ground was just a slab of concrete. A bright orange uniform reminded him that he wasn't going to be able to complete his masterpiece. Chains wrapped around his wrists and ankles restrained him from adding another number to his death toll that he kept in his head. He was able to clasp his hands together as he patiently awaited his new doctor. Another overpaid professional that thought he could get inside a maniac, but he wasn't always a maniac. Not knowing what truly lurked inside gave Greg the upper hand. Prior to being caught and processed, Greg was venting at a bar to get over the only thing that used to matter in his life. The bar was loud and upbeat until Greg walked through the massive wooden doors that swung like an old-fashioned western salon. Country music blasted in the background. Johnny Cash's voice never sounded so powerful as Man in Black played. The four bar patrons that sat at the bar turned their heads simultaneously as Greg made his way towards the bar. Gary was dressed in a long black leather jacket, jeans, and black shoes. His hair was spiked and he was wearing a Metallica and Justice for All shirt. Eric, the 40-year-old bartender, stopped making drinks and mingling with customers. I knew the bartender pretty well and the locals. They didn't stop what they were doing because of me. It was the punks that were at the pool tables that were really irritating my friends. The bar was handcrafted with fine oak and was still beautiful as it aged and proved to endure the wear and tear of time. The faces of my fellow drinking buddies were directing me to the obnoxious punks that thought the bar was their personal trash can. Empty bottles and cigarette butts laid upon the once smooth wooden floor. I cringed at the mere sight of their laziness. The three punks were all in good shape, but one had to be the leader. It was the leader that I was concerned about taking down. The rest would crumble once he was subdued. The leader was 6'5" and weighed around 300 pounds, but he wasn't fat at all. He had a long black mohawk and a nose ring that made sure others knew how much of a pig he really was, or at least that's what I saw when I looked at him. He wore a black Misfits shirt and had a shiny silver bullet belt. I liked his taste in music, but unfortunately he was just in my way of a drinking binge that was due to my recent ex-girlfriend. Gary walked slowly as he locked eyes on his target. He balled up his fists as tight as humanly possible and stopped right in front of the giant. Gary only stood at 5'10" and weighed around 180, but he wasn't scared. To Gary it was just another challenge and obstacle that stood in his way. The behemoth of a man leaned his pool stick on the front of the pool table and began to talk. "James, what's up? You got a problem, little guy?" "Gary, yeah I do. You three don't belong here. I'll give you a chance to leave now." The three knuckleheads laughed simultaneously after hearing the command. "James, who the fuck do you think you are?" "Gary, it doesn't matter who I am, what matters is that you leave quietly or I make you leave." "James, you got some balls, old man, I'll give you that. I'm going to have to say no fucking way, make us." James cocked back his right arm and torso to the left and punched Greg with all of his weight. Greg took the punch, wiped his bloody lip and put his fists up. 8 eyes from the bar focused on the battle that was about to end quickly. "Crowd, come on Gary! Get him!" 3 devastating punches to the head were all it took for the 300-pound beast to fall and go to sleep. His 2 friends were frozen with their mouths wide open. When their brains finally thawed out, they scattered out of the bar. The bartender and the other 3 people at the bar were ecstatic and bought me rounds, enough rounds to end up behind bars. James wasn't unconscious. I had hit him so hard that he died. 20 beers and 7 shots. Later I was gone and driving like a bat out of hell. I left the bar around 2 am and driving home was harder than killing a 300-pound beast. Rain poured down heavy as I smoked a cigarette and tried to sober up from cool air while I was going 80 miles an hour on the street. A metallic black 1969 supped-up Chevy Nova tore up the vacant streets. I had no idea I was going to catch the killer that America had been rooting for. Michael McCullicuti was a veteran officer in his late 40s and was just on a routine speed inspection when his prayers were answered. Prior to his routine speed trap he had set up, the station had reported another random hotel murder. You know how people say right place at the right time? I always thought it was kind of dumb, but I was going to eat my thoughts pretty soon. Luminous blue lightning struck the streets as I continued my drunk racing. The lightning struck a light pole to the right of me and it fell on the hood of my car. I slammed on my brakes. The black piece of steel started to roll violently over and over. I was too concerned about getting home than putting on my seatbelt. The seatbelt would have saved me from the windshield. Gary was lucky for once in his life but woke up from the wreck in a cold cell. 16 stitches occupied Greg's forehead to serve as a painful reminder that it could have been worse. Right now though death wouldn't be a bad thing to Gary, it would be a sweet release of being trapped. Dr. Anderson walked in the holding cell, which was constructed of strong reinforced glass and concrete. The wall in front of me caught my eye as I picked up my head that was lying upon my clasped fists and stared. They had to be stupid to think that I was unaware of the team of experts behind the black-tinted glass. The doctor in front of me was staring at me as if he could see my thoughts. His dark blue eyes pierced through my throbbing head. He broke away from the long stare down as he sat down. I sat down and pulled Gary's profile out of my black briefcase. I stared at him out of disgust even though I still had respect for what he had done. The disgust was more like jealousy. He did what we study for years and still don't fully understand. 20% of me admired his intelligence and guts that he obviously had since he started his massacre of corrupted people. The other 80% of me wanted to probe him with questions and find out what made him turn out this way. Dr. Anderson, hello Gary, do you know why you're here? Gary, I'm here because I got sloppy and got caught. His response was pretty normal because that was typical of a serial killer, but I don't think he intended to get caught. Statistically every killer wants to get caught for the attention, but it was bothering me because I could tell that he had no intentions of getting caught. Dr. Anderson, I know that you're smarter than me and it's not from reading your profile because I know you purposely failed the personality test to throw people off. All of the doctors have said similar things, but there was something different about Dr. Anderson. I started to think about what went wrong and if I would ever share my life with a stranger. I was used to being probed since I was a child, but this guy really seemed like he cared about me at a more personal level. That's just the way I felt. I could be wrong, but you never know until you take a chance in life. The thought of playing with him had crossed my mind, but I decided to take a different approach. Gary, I will cooperate with you, but I'd like it if I could tell you my story before you probe me with all of your in-depth questions. Those are my only terms that you must meet. Dr. Anderson, a very bold request from a man that's on death row, but then again, what do you have to lose? His comment hurt what was left of my feelings, but I decided to brush it off instead of get mad. If I got mad and showed my anger, then he would have succeeded in accomplishing his goal. Gary, I'll be more than happy to assist you, but you have to listen to my side of the story first. Is that going to be a problem, or do we have a deal, doctor? I thought about possible scenarios as the doctor became silent. All of the ending results led me to the conclusion that I had to be cooperative even if there was no chance in hell that I would be released. I had made a connection with Gary instantly and had to keep going or I would lose his interest. Like every human being, the need for attention was Gary's weakness. The crazy bastard loved to hear himself talk. The only problem that I would have is believing his story. I would have to play along with him and have him confess where he buried the bodies. Dr. Anderson, we have a deal, Gary, but the second that you lie to me, all bets are off. Gary, I wouldn't dream of lying to you. Deep down inside I'm an honest man. Dr. Anderson, you better hope that you don't mislead me. I wasn't planning on misleading him, I wanted to help him find the other victims. I could see pain in his eyes from years of being alone. It was another part of my gift that was difficult to explain in words. Looking into a person's eyes for me was like looking into the window of a person's soul. The difference was that it was far more painful on my end. I had to see all the darkest moments in that person's life. As Gary stared into the eyes of his new doctor, he was taken back by disturbing memories of a time in Dr. Anderson's life when he was alone and on a self-destructive past. It was like watching a movie that had sped up the frames but nothing positive replayed. It was all a torrent of violence caused by betrayal. The movie was played backwards in my head as I tried to fast forward to the beginning of Dr. Anderson's pain. I felt weak as Gary continued to stare at me. It was like he was draining my energy. My body was literally paralyzed from the cold stare he gave me. Sweat began to accumulate on my forehead as I struggled to snap out of the trance that he had me in. I couldn't even blink, but I could still breathe as I thought about the power this killer had. Dr. Anderson was going to have to work for once instead of relying on bullshit and his colleagues to drug his patient. Gary was going to make sure that he struggled to figure him out. Chapter 2, Gary's Childhood. Dr. Anderson, let us begin. Dr. Anderson pressed record on his gray handheld tape recorder and laid it down on the wooden rectangular table. Gary cracked his neck by tilting his head to the right and left and took a deep breath. It had been years since he was asked to talk about his upbringing. It was a very sensitive subject for him. After all, the beginning is usually the root of the problem. My childhood was one thing I was always uncomfortable to talk about. It was the only thing I truly regretted. Gary, you definitely know how to pick the right probing questions, don't you? Dr. Anderson, I thought you were game. Don't tell me taking a trip down memory lane is a big problem for you. Gary, ask away, but I'm not going to tell you a watered-down version of the truth. You will know the true meaning of dysfunctional after I'm done telling you about my life. I actually believed everything he said at the time. He had a way about him that made me feel sympathetic. He kept a straight face most of the time and never strayed from his story. I was the runt of 4 other brothers, so I was always thinking of ways to solve everyday problems. I can remember taking apart VCRs, lawnmowers and computers. All I wanted to do was to figure out how it all worked. If I figured out how it all worked, it made me feel wanted and complete inside. My father was a very strict man when he was home, but he was only home on rare occasions. Words turned into images as Gary continues telling Dr. Anderson how he grew up. We go back to a time when Gary was still learning the basic ways of the world. A 3-year-old Gary sits in the living room and starts playing with his Legos. The house was a small 3-bedroom house, but 7 people managed to somewhat coexist in the hell that they lived in. I call it hell because it was a time that I wish I never endured. Some people say that hell is made up. I don't think it's made up. I think it's something that God instilled upon us to question life constantly. Thus it adds meaning to our lives. I played constantly with Legos before corporate America made it easy to construct complicated models. Nowadays the world was more into saving time and cutting a human's creativity. The true dreamer or artist was on the top of the endangered species list. They had a zero tolerance for things to benefit mankind. I played constantly to build what I saw in my head. I might have had no clue as to what I was building, but I kept at it. I was driven back then to make something out of nothing. I wish I knew what happened to me. My father would come home, hit my mom and go back out again until I'd wake up and see him passed out on the couch. This went on for years until I grew up and was eye to eye with the enemy. In the small 2-bedroom house in Montebello, California, a drunk speeds through the streets at 2 a.m. in the morning. All 5 young boys are sleeping, but Gary wakes up abruptly from the loud disturbance. The house is a run-down white stucco house. As the drunk stumbles around the living room, he knocks over objects that are in his way. A lamp smashes on the living room floor. Gary jumps up to his feet from his little bunk bed and runs to the living room. I remember hiding behind the couch overlooking my own father at his weakest moment. What I saw wasn't my father, he was a beast that was only bent on destroying everything in his path. He was knocking shit over on purpose to get my mother's attention, he was a pissed off child inside and nothing more. Gary stopped narrating his past and looked at the doctor. Dr. Anderson, why did you stop? Gary, my father is not imperative to who I am or what I have become, I believe you possess the power to be what you want to be. Dr. Anderson, you don't think that environment plays a major role on the outcome of an individual? Gary, no, I believe that people make the choice or they don't make a choice at all. You can either be what you truly aspire to be or you can just let life rule you. Psychology is mostly all bullshit anyway, you guys make up shit to treat people that have no real disorders. Dr. Anderson, just continue with your story, I'm not trying to argue with a serial killer. Gary's temper rose but he kept a blank slate on the outside as he took deep breaths to calm his nerves. Gary fast forwards from childhood to his 20s. After the hell that I went through with my father, I vowed to be the strongest guy I could be both mentally and physically. Perfection had become an obsession with me and I had to achieve it to know what it was like to win and be appreciated for my gifts. My outlets were reading and working out until I felt nothing but pain to remind me that it's only temporary. Throughout high school I was the quiet loner type, my only concerns were getting great grades and writing what I felt. My stories that I wrote started to give me nightmares. The nightmares wouldn't let up and I became obsessed with them. I would soon get my shot at carrying out one of my stories, all of my kills were done out of injustices that others should never have to go through. Gary tells the story so perfectly to the estranged doctor that the doctor feels like he's literally inside Gary's head. The sounds that emit out of Gary's mouth began to transform into visual images and this is what we see. A violent torrent of rain battered the roof of my one-bedroom apartment. I had lived alone since I was 18, I chose to leave and never made an attempt of looking back. The rage of the storm persisted and Gary's idle hands would soon lead him to his supposed first kill. Gary sat in his room writing away, he was dressed in an Iron Maiden, killer's shirt, jeans, and black skater shoes. A loud yell echoed in the parking lot and diverted my attention, I dropped my pen and ran out to see what the noise was. Little kid, leave me alone, stuttering, I didn't do anything to you. In the middle of the apartment parking lot was a mob of kids my age, bullying a mentally challenged kid. 6 tall kids dressed in all black formed a circle around the poor little kid. They pushed him around and he fell hard onto the concrete, scraping his lip. Blood dripped out of his mouth from the fierce push from the leader. Gary, hey! Leave him the fuck alone, now! The group of misfit teens stopped what they were doing and looked up at the giant who commanded them to stop. Gary's yell paralyzed them momentarily. But then they went back to pummeling the bloody-lipped kid. They ignored me, so I had to go down there. I ran down the stairs and walked up to the kid that gave him the bloody lip, grabbed him by his hair and smashed his head on my knee. His head bounced like a ball from the force and he fell on his back. The blow rendered him unconscious and the others ran away while the poor kid ran to his apartment on the other side of the complex. Something took a hold of me and I couldn't stop. I just lost my sanity, the unconscious body on the floor didn't seem to satisfy me. The bastard had to learn a lesson and I was going to teach him. Luckily the storm was apparently louder than the commotion as I quickly picked up his body and carried it up to my apartment. I placed him down on my living room coffee table and walked to the kitchen. I picked up the largest kitchen knife and stood in front of the punk that laid upon my glass table. The thoughts that ran through Gary's head were all about severing the bully's body parts, there was nothing positive circling around. As he stood in silence he turned on his stereo and blasted Metallica's Four Horsemen. Music was the only real friend I had and I relied on it when I needed to come up with an answer. Hell, I listened to it all the time, it relaxed me and put me in a trance. The knife took control of my hand and started to slice into the once intact flesh before me. I didn't try to stop it, it was soothing and I had ended my tormented thoughts. Blood oozed out of every slit that the sharp cold blade had created. 20 minutes had passed and I came back to reality. I had no idea what I had Done until I looked at my right hand that was trembling. The tool of destruction was drenched in blood, but my brain was unable to register any emotion towards my previous actions. Society will of course blame the music or say that what I did was too extreme, but how is one responsible for what they can't control? The question is a paradox in itself. I've come to terms of my crimes and realize that I deserve what's coming to me. Dr. Anderson, what did you do with the body? Gary, I don't remember. Dr. Anderson, oh, now you're a fucking comedian now too, huh? Gary, I'm not fucking joking here. I don't remember. I go to another place every time I've taken someone's life. Dr. Anderson, easy, easy. We can end this right now if you keep up your temper. Breathe, breathe. Silence sent chills up Dr. Anderson's spine. The monster that sat in front of him listened to his advice. He calmed down in a matter of seconds. Gary, please excuse my temper, I didn't mean to lose my cool. Dr. Anderson, it's okay, just don't let it happen again. The doctor was starting to piss me off, but I still respected him. He wasn't a robot like the others. The others had no emotions as they drilled me with their stupid questions. I could see right through their facade. They had no intentions of being my friend, they just wanted to figure me out. After the knife had slaughtered the bully, I was still trying to come back to planet Earth. The bloody sight before me wasn't how I had remembered the young man. I never felt so alive and calm at the same time. A sane person would have never contemplated even getting involved with the disturbance outside, but Gary was far from sane. His thoughts wouldn't cease, they only sped up and consumed him. After my first random kill, my dreams started to talk to me. They commanded me to get out and stop the corrupted scum that walked this earth. I started to justify my actions as I fell deeper down into a hole. The hole that Gary was referring to was his downward spiral. It's just a part of the process of becoming a monster, only Gary was unique because he was never taught right from wrong. He had to learn everything on his own. His parents were just there. The only thing they taught him was pain. It would take Gary almost all his life to experience love. All my fond childhood memories were in my head. Around my household everyone was on their own. We never did things as a family. I can recall countless beatings that I had to witness and take. When Gary was 14, his father tested his son's strength and lost. I'll never forget the night I stood up to him. I was already in a bad mood and my dad picked on my mom for the last time in my presence. He was so tanked that night that I could smell him from my room. I was trying to sleep, but the yelling coming from their room was irritating me. I tried to turn the TV up to ignore it, but they overpowered it. My mom began to scream as my dad was beating her relentlessly, or so I thought. I got up from the edge of my bed and ran to their room. It turned out that my dad was just pestering my mom with a pillow, and that was all. I didn't care. I was full of adrenaline and ready to inflict pain upon him. I pushed his big fat body down onto the floor and began to swing my fists rapidly. As Gary's fists hit his father's face, his mother egged him on to keep going. Gary's mother, good. I hope he kills you. All I saw was red as I continued to inflict pain upon my own father. It didn't matter who he was at the time, I couldn't take it anymore. My hatred towards him had been brewing all my life, and now I had chosen to release it. I finally stopped after my brain registered my mom's words. I didn't want to kill this big child, I only wanted to put fear into him. I was tired of not doing anything. Something inside Gary woke up and took control. He was no longer living in fear, he was no longer the victim. His childhood had served its purpose. The pain that he had endured growing up was all leading up to this moment. Dr. Anderson, how did that sudden gain of power make you feel, and would you have stopped if your mom hadn't intervened? Gary, it made me feel in charge of my life for once. I would have kept going because that son of a bitch deserved it. I scribbled his response and thought about how calm he was during my interview. He had lost control earlier, but now he was calm, cool and collected. My notes were basically a list of Gary's many attributes, but he was still unstable. I would soon forget that he was a master manipulator as I started to side with his war-zone childhood. Dr. Anderson, whatever happened to your father after that? Gary, he died from pancreatic cancer a few years after I moved out. Gary sits on the edge of his bed after beating the shit out of his own father. As he sits on the edge of the bed, he pants like a madman in order to try and catch his breath. The deep breathing helped me stay positive, for my thoughts were beginning to become destructive. All I wanted to do was end his life, but the oxygen that was returning to my body stopped my murderous thoughts. My thoughts weren't the only things that were motivating me at the time. I had flashbacks of all the shit I used to take from my old man. Peace was only possible when my parents weren't home or I was rocking out to music. The images that flashed before me as I tried to calm down were of my father's hand striking me when I disobeyed his orders. Gary's father stumbles into his son's room and grabs the next CD that Gary was about to put in. At the time I was listening to a lot of punk and my dad couldn't stand it. No son of his was going to stray away from what he wanted. He wouldn't tolerate my stubbornness and total disregard to his authority. He took the CD and broke it in half. My face turned red instantly. "Father, I told you not to listen to this shit. Gary, I hate you, I wish you weren't my father." An open-handed smack echoed throughout the little two-bedroom house, but no one else cared to investigate. It was an everyday thing in my household. Fighting was how we expressed our true emotions. I wanted to cry from the blow, but I held back the pain and focused on looking at him in the eyes. His eyes were so dark brown that they were more of a soulless black. They never deviated mine as I tried to show him that I wasn't afraid of him. Instead of leaving the room, he had to continue with his cowardly assault. A closed fist struck my nose. I grabbed my nose to ease the pain as blood flowed out of both of my nostrils. The sick bastard got off on seeing me in pain. After the sight of me bleeding, he left. "Dr. Anderson, for someone that vowed to not be like his father, you're not better than him." "Gary, I kill bad people, I don't pick on innocent people like the assholes that rot in prison." "Dr. Anderson, why do you continue to justify your actions like you're some kind of savior?" "Gary, this world has become an empty shell, look around you, there are no more heroes anymore, just horror stories." The doctor thought about Gary's last statement, and for a serial killer that was considered insane, he started to make sense. Psychology teaches that environment plays a major factor on how an individual will turn out, but in Gary's case he rose above the negativity. He decided to out the evil and corrupt in the world by fighting fire with fire. Killing people is wrong either way, but Gary had a point, the legal system is extremely slow. "Dr. Anderson, I don't totally disagree with you, but what you did was still wrong. Please continue with your story, I want to know more." "After my first kill I needed to feel that rush again, I couldn't black out. I wanted to experience and remember the whole process of making a human into an animal. The only way to do that was to go hunting. I was in college taking anatomy to learn everything I could about the human body and its weaknesses. I started bar hopping more to see if I would come across some random bar fights. The only problem with that I found was that they rarely escalated to more than a couple of shoves and cheap shots. The average person is afraid to fight and will do anything to avoid it unless they're extremely intoxicated. I ended up breaking up fights more than anything. I needed a new venue, so I decided to think of other ways of finding predators. Chapter 3, Love and Loss. Night had fallen upon the small town as Gary sat in his padded cell thinking about his past victories. He had only told the doctor a fraction of what he had done. Now that the interview was over for the day, Gary would have a hard time sleeping. The killings weren't what kept him from sleeping at night, it was the fact that he remembered everything bad that had happened to him. His memory was amazing when it came down to replaying his past. Other things didn't really concern him now that he was alone again. There were many things that he thought about, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. She was once the love of his life, but that was so long ago. Now she was just another faded memory that he held onto. As the years slowly dragged on, he blamed himself for their relationship ending. He could have saved her, but she got a taste and wanted more. The dim lighting starts to fade to black as Gary mumbles to himself. "Gary, I could have saved her, she was supposed to be the one." Darkness covered the quiet room Gary was in as he was alone with his thoughts. He put his head down and tried to remember her for who she was and not for what she did to him. What she did to him left a stain on his heart, but he had to keep living until it was his time to go. His body finally gave in and he fell fast asleep. We enter Gary's dream world, which is full of sorrow from the past to the present. A slideshow of images flash before us as Gary shuffles through his memories. Every image is another reminder of the pain that he has been through. The first disturbing image is of Gary's father attacking him over something so frivolous. A still image of terror makes us cringe as we continue to investigate inside Gary's world. The beast can't remember what he has done, for the past has hurt him deeply. The peaceful slumber that he is in is only temporary. There wasn't a chemical in the world that could put him in a permanent trance. She was the only person in the world that he had truly loved. Now he was alone. The only thing he had was his thoughts. Thoughts that were all created by an angel. He had no choice in the matter, for she was no more. Beautiful bright white snowflakes fall upon the college campus. The entire campus was covered in snow as the two strangers walked around, leaving only footprints behind them. The air was stagnant and cold as they continued to walk towards each other without knowing. Navigating through the snow was not an easy task for the two strangers. It was more than the blind leading the blind. A stronger inner force was drawing these two random people together. As the blizzard persisted, the two people stopped dead in their tracks as they met eye to eye for the first time. A beautiful dirty blonde woman stood before me. I could see her breathing heavy as she tried to regain her strength. Gary, hi, I'm Gary. What's your name? Michelle, my name is Michelle, why are you here? Gary, I don't know really, I guess I just woke up and decided to walk around. What brings you here? Michelle, I really don't know either, that's weird. I swear that I originally had an idea. That was then and this is now, as the sleeping beast dreamt of the only good that ever existed in his life. Others had a collection of fond memories, but Gary only had pain to hold onto to prove that he existed. Although it may seem like Gary was a negative person, inside he truly thought he was doing good things. Lights slowly came on as the next day abruptly disturbed Gary's slumber. Dr. Anderson, wake up. It's time to talk again. I slowly stood up to my feet. My eyes were still adjusting to the light and the rude intrusion. Gary kept a straight face as he walked out of his padded cell and followed the doctor to the interrogation room. He tried to keep his head down as he followed the only person in the psych ward that understood him. His only friend now was a stranger. She used to be his best friend, but those days were long gone. The bright lights annoyed my eyes as I followed Dr. Anderson to another day of reliving the past. The animals stayed behind their cages as the two slowly walked to the end of the hall. The floor was a shiny black and white tile. Footsteps echoed until they reached the end of the long hallway. Today was the day that Dr. Anderson would have more respect for Gary. Not many people would go to the extreme lengths that Gary did for his fallen loved one. Dr. Anderson, would you like a cup of coffee to wake up? Gary, thanks. The doc handed him a hot cup of coffee and sat down. Dr. Anderson, how are you feeling this morning? Gary, I'm stuck on the past. The present isn't worth living sometimes. I only think about her most of the time. Dr. Anderson, what was so great about your past that you're unable to live in the now? I mean, you made it this far, why give up? Gary, I killed to feel something and now I don't know what to feel anymore. I've never missed someone so much before. Dr. Anderson, it's almost as if you're justifying your actions once again. Don't you understand that what you did was wrong? Gary, I know what I did was wrong because society tells me it's wrong, but I don't think I was in the wrong. I saw people that preyed upon innocent people and they needed to be eliminated. Gary's answer wasn't what Dr. Anderson was expecting. He thought he was going to blame society for why he did what he did. I never met a killer that was so open about himself. Then again, he could have been lying to me the entire time and I wouldn't be able to tell. As Gary took generous sips of coffee, I studied his expressionless face. He never flinched from the hot scalding coffee. He never even looked at me as he devoured it within a matter of seconds. He appeared to be human on the outside. If only I could tell what he was thinking and feeling without having to be inquisitive. Look at him trying so hard to figure out what you're thinking by observing your body language. He has no clue who he's messing with. Your acting skills are better than I thought, but how long can you keep this up? The other side of Gary was finally surfacing after being buried deep within his soul. Inside his head was a war of two opposing forces that would fight each other constantly. This time the end was near of the ongoing fight that persisted in Gary's heart and soul for years. He thought she had cured it, but sometimes you can't fix things that are innate. Dr. Anderson, okay, now that you have some caffeine in your system, we can begin. Gary, I'm ready. Document. Dr. Anderson, going back to the first kill, did you ever feel an ounce of remorse for ending someone's life? The small room that they occupied was silenced by a question that was still processing inside Gary's head. Gary never really thought about the feelings of the other people, he only cared about doing what was right. Dr. Anderson sat patiently with his right fist on his chin. The awkward silence was starting to irritate him. It was eerie that it was taking Gary forever to come up with an answer. He just sat there staring at me as if he didn't hear the question. This silence had to end, or I was going to figure out how to end it. I wasn't stalling the doctor on purpose, I was in deep contemplation on the original question. After 2 minutes of cogitating, I realized that I didn't have a real answer. I had more questions to ask, the document questions that I would have to ask to have a better understanding of myself. The truth of the matter was that I felt nothing because I became a totally different person when I killed. I didn't feel comfortable with saying I don't know, so I had to buy some time to perfect my answer. Gary, I don't remember at the time of each kill, I regret my actions now, for I hate what I've become. His answer wasn't what I was expecting. I was hoping he would say something to justify what he had done. I really didn't know what to say at the time, he had rendered me speechless. Blackouts were normal with his mental illness, but he thought nothing of it. He was unable to see that there was something wrong with him. I had to reply, but I literally had nothing to say. He looked right through me with his cold dark blue eyes. My intuitive gift was hard to use at the time. Dr. Anderson wouldn't let me see what truly lurked deep within his subconscious. I had to snap out of the trance I was somehow in. Dr. Anderson, your blackouts are leading me to believe that you might be a paranoid schizophrenic. The fact that you're not able to remember what happens is very disturbing. I'm going to get some meds for you. If I'm right, then your blackouts should stop and you should be able to remember more. Gary, I trust you, and if you think it will help, then I'm all for it. The two had reached an understanding that most people would take a while to feel comfortable doing. It was unreal that a mass murderer and a doctor could agree on therapy for what ailed him. Gary was usually too stubborn to listen to anyone, so the fact that he was able to agree with what the doctor thought was amazing. It was also Dr. Anderson's plan to mix drugs with therapy in order to hear more about the loss of his loved one. Dr. Anderson, it will definitely help you, but I need you to be open and detailed when I ask you a question, okay? I tried to concentrate on what the doctor was saying, but I was constantly interrupted by the annoying voice. It kept insisting that I kill the doctor at once. Voice, why do you toy with him? You know that in the end he can't fix who we are always going to be what we are. No drug can change that, I will eventually return and take over. Kill him, he is useless. He only clouds our vision, he's wasting our time. Gary couldn't come up with a solution as he continued to stare at Dr. Anderson. For once in his life he had hit a wall, right or wrong he had to make a decision. I waited patiently for him to respond, but I was beginning to think that he wanted me to break the ice. Dr. Anderson, Gary. Are you okay? Gary, I'm sorry, I was thinking of someone. I will cooperate, I'm tired of living this way. I was shocked that Gary was willing to go along with the treatment. Unfortunately, I was unable to realize that he was still empty inside as my guard faded away. A firm handshake closed the negotiation. Dr. Anderson succeeded, but would it be worth it in the end? Only time would unveil the truth. That night I fell asleep and dreamt of how she used to be. If only I could go back, but life only promises two things and two things only, pain and death. Gary's eyes closed shut, but his mind was open and working harder than ever. It shuffled through all of his memories and created a random playlist. The first memory that played was of the first time he met her. Her long blonde hair reflected and shined from the bright white snow that covered the ground. Her hair was the only thing that was visible from far away. She walked slowly as if she was cautious of the dark figure that was ahead of her. The beast continued walking through the snow, the only thing that was visible was his black attire, footprints, and breath. Snowflakes continued to fall upon the desolate college campus as the two stared at each other. The beautiful blonde took off her white hoodie after she had introduced herself. I know it sounds absurd, but I fell in love with her at first sight. Call me crazy, but that's what happened. It was as if all my past pains had disappeared and all I wanted to do was get to know her. Her eyes were like looking at a bright blue ocean that continued to crash upon the shore. I might have moved too fast, but she was the only woman I truly loved besides my mom. It wasn't the fact that I did a lot for her that hurt the most. Money was just money to me. What really hurt me was how she just gave up on me and left without a sign. What she did made me feel so insignificant and small. It changed me and I went back to my old ways. Dr. Anderson, I know heartbreak can hurt, Gary, but you have to talk about it if you want your wounds to heal. Tell me, Gary, what happened to her? Gary, she left me. Is that what you want to hear? She left me. The calm doctor was taken back by the aggressive response. He had hit a nerve and now he had to figure out how to mend it. Gary was banging his head on the table as if it would ease the pain. Dr. Anderson, Gary, I understand that you're hurt from her, but there's no need for you to yell at me. I had nothing to do with it. Please calm down. Gary, have you ever lost someone that you loved with all your heart? Dr. Anderson, no, I can't say that I have, but you've overcome so much from your childhood to let it get you down. Gary pounded the table with his fists like he was King Kong, letting out all his rage. The doctor was taken back by Gary's violent display. There was such force behind his fists that he had actually left imprints in the wooden table. Dr. Anderson, Gary, you need to calm down, breathe. Gary, breathe. Gary, answer the fucking question, Doc. Dr. Anderson, yes, I have. This isn't how this is going to work. You don't ask the fucking questions here, okay? Gary knew what he was doing. He was like a T-Rex playing with his food before he completely devoured it whole. Gary, all right. Didn't know I was going to hit a nerve document. Dr. Anderson had to take a deep breath too. He almost lost his cool. He knew that if he wanted any of this therapy to actually be effective, he had to control the conversation. Voice. Stop toying with him, you have him right where you want him. Why are you wasting your time? You could be out there getting rid of the filth that walks this earth. He wouldn't stop taunting me. He kept telling me what I needed to do and how I was rotting in this cell. I hated the voice, but he was right. This cage confined me to just dwell on my mistakes of how I got caught. The doctor and the beast engaged in a silent staring contest as if one was waiting for the other one to lose and speak. Finally Gary broke the awkward silence and let the doctor have it. Gary, look, this isn't going to work if you're not going to let me ask you questions. I'll answer your questions after you answer a question from me. If you don't comply with my ultimatum, then you won't gain anything from me. We have a deal, Doc. A long audible sigh came out of the doctor's mouth. It didn't have to be this way, but he had failed to take control of the conversation, and his only option now was to accept Gary's deal. A deal in which he had to tell him what was really inside his head. Dr. Anderson, I accept your deal, go ahead and ask away. A big smile grew on the face of a maniac that would stop at nothing to wish Dr. Anderson had never stepped foot in the cell. Chapter 4, Killing Spree. I was tired of playing with the doctor. Now it was time to see what he was truly made of. He had agreed to my terms and conditions, so now I just had to let time run its course. Time would prove that he was not as strong as I had first thought. After all, he lost control of the conversation, and I had a feeling that he knows that I know that. I would now have my chance to get inside his head and see what makes him tick. Gary stared down at the concrete with nothing on his mind in particular. The doctor rang the bell warning Gary that he was coming in to take him to the Interrogating room. The annoying loud buzz distracted his thinking and he snapped out of his daydream. The walk to the room was depressing to Gary. It was always a reminder that he would soon be rotting in the dirt. I felt like a child being grounded. I had to find a way out of there or I was going to lose my cool. I could no longer pretend to have these feelings anymore. The only emotion that I ever felt was anger. Dr. Anderson, are you ready to begin? Gary, yeah, but remember I go first, then it's your turn. Dr. Anderson, okay, I'm all ears. Gary, what got you into this profession? Spare me a bullshit answer and don't tell me it's just because you wanted to help people. Gary, okay, decent answer. Your turn. Dr. Anderson, how does it make you feel after you end a person's life and chop them up into little pieces, knowing that they once might have been a husband, mother, sister, brother, or a father? Gary, I don't worry about that, they weren't good people and that's why I killed them. The doctor scribbled in his notepad once again as if he was getting closer to diagnosing Gary. He could write as much as he wanted and probably wouldn't be able to categorize Gary. Gary stared at the ceiling as if he was talking to someone in his head. He didn't utter one word but he definitely looked spaced out. Gary, what was your childhood like? Let me guess. Mommy and Daddy didn't love you. Dr. Anderson, very funny, no they were assholes and they died when I was 18. Gary, come on doc, you have to elaborate more than that. I was kind of taken back that he wasn't buying my blunt answer. He had this persistence about him that made it difficult to not give in. I took a minute to think about how I should word my answer. If I worded it incorrectly then he would be able to detect my bullshit. Dr. Anderson, my father was a drunk too and my mom was never home, is that what you wanna hear? You wanna hear that my mom slept around and always said she was working? Dr. Anderson tried so hard to keep his cool but he lost it. Gary hid his smirk but inside his demented head he was satisfied. He wanted to ask a trigger question. And he got a hostile answer. Now he had to use the fire that he ignited to get what he wanted out of him. After all, he didn't see him as a person, he saw him as just another obstacle that was in the way. Only, he would have to use the obstacle in order to get what he truly wanted, freedom. His next tactic would have to be to keep aggravating him. Gary, okay doc, I get it, I get it. It was now my turn but I had been thrown off track by his tactics. He had really pissed me off and I don't even know why. He was just a piece of shit that killed people. I had to just man up and think of a better way to get a real answer. Nothing came to me, I literally just sat there. I sat there as if the answer would come to me but it never did. I was interrupted by the one patient that I could never really understand. As I stared blankly with no expression whatsoever, I kept breathing through my nose to calm myself down. Dr. Anderson, what really happened with your long-term girlfriend that you supposedly loved more than anything? That particular question had taken Gary back and he was now stuck in his head replaying his kills. He started replaying his kills to try and avoid the question. He thought that maybe if he stalled for a little it would piss off Dr. Anderson. It didn't work, so he decided to use one of his expertise tricks. The art of spinning. He was extremely gifted in shifting blame and spinning the conversation. Gary, you don't want to go there, how about I tell you more of the people I killed that you don't know about? Dr. Anderson immediately said yes inside his head. Before he agreed, he said yes, not thinking at all about what he was getting into because he considered himself winning. If he could get Gary to confess to more crimes, then he would probably get the credit and possibly get a bonus or something. Unfortunately, he was only concerned about himself and not what Gary's real motives were. Gary started to talk and as he began talking, his words had such conviction that they were beginning to create a visual story inside Dr. Anderson's head. He started telling the story of his real first kill. It was something that Gary had locked deep within his tormented soul that he never told a soul until now. I was around 17 and I had been really frustrated. Because my parents had taken away my car. They took away my car because they caught me smoking weed in my room. I thought it was pretty harsh and it didn't hurt, but I still wanted vengeance. I still had to justify my actions in my head for some reason. I guess you could say it was all a part of my ritual. There was a kid around the neighborhood that was always picking on other kids and I had decided he was going to be my target. His name was Jimmy Olsen. He was a fat tall kid that had to pick on the small and weak. I kept my eye on him for a week, just spying on him and seeing what he liked to do in order to gain insight. I had to know the perfect timing that I could strike. One day I would eventually take out all my anger and aggression out on him, full throttle, my dad would say. He always says he's proud he raised me to be full throttle. I was getting extremely bored and saw him picking on a poor kid with a disability. I walked up to him out of the shadows that I was hiding in. It was around 6 p.m. and I was wearing black gloves. A black hoodie that had my favorite band at the time on it. My favorite band at the time was Children of Bodom. They were a heavy metal death band. He never saw me coming. The last thing Jimmy probably saw before his life flashed before his eyes was a hoodie with the Grim Reaper holding a scythe. I walked up behind him slowly and took out a fish line that I had stolen from my dad's garage. The kid had scurried home out of fear. Fear, such a primitive emotion I used to think until I felt it once. Only, I felt it over a woman. The 17-year-old monster in the making quickly wrapped the fish line around the bully's fat throat. Gary pulled back with all of his anger from having his car privileges stripped from him. It was such a frivolous reason to kill someone, but I have no fucking conscience. I only pretended to for years. I listened to his last breath that was struggling to come out as he gasped and died. A regular murderer would have stopped there, but I still had a lot of anger to let out, and I had to also get rid of the body. I was still young and inexperienced back then, but I was very creative. I had watched enough horror movies to know how to get rid of the evidence. Gary's hands were covered in blood as he worked hard on cutting up the fat piece of shit. He worked effortlessly in the garage using his dad's saw, and he used something he would use as he grew into a monster. A beautiful black 6-inch double-bladed knife with a leather-bound handle served a purpose. It was just an inanimate object, but he made it real with the horrible things he did with it. Gary picked up the bully that weighed 250 pounds and put him on his dad's wooden table. He went into the kitchen and grabbed a bunch of big black trash bags. In the background he played Motorhead-Hellraiser as he turned on the 7-inch circular saw that would cut perfectly. With his left hand he used his knife to slit his throat. Dark red blood slowly oozed out of Gary's once intact throat. The blood leaked down both sides, so Gary moved his head up so it hanged over the table. As it hung over the table, the blood fell into a trash can that he had stolen from his parents' room. Prior to doing all this, he had thought ahead and put a trash bag in the trash can. All the blood collected in the trash can. I remember at the time I wasn't really thinking, I was just acting upon my rage. Gary's rage that he speaks of is alarming and sent cringes throughout Dr. Anderson's body. Dr. Anderson's eyes grew wide as he kept listening to Gary tell his acts of rage. He was taken back so much by Gary's actions that he leaned back in his chair as if he couldn't handle listening to it anymore. He was very methodical, and I wasn't really able to understand his pathology behind how he knew how to do all of this. How could a young kid just learn Everything from horror movies, the way he described. The acts he did were so detailed. He truly painted visual images and I felt like I was there. Gary wasn't done telling his story, he still had more to tell and he would make sure that he didn't leave any details out. His hands stayed steady as he continued to use the saw as if it had become another appendage. The saw. The gorgeous sharp saw cut through the fat body and bones of a person that only felt better when he was putting someone else down. A big grin consumed Gary's face as he continued to cut up the bully as if he was nothing more than a piece of meat. Blood covered the entire disgusting corpse as he finally finished doing what he felt like he was meant to do. Even at an early age Gary seemed to be a psychopath. He was charming but had no feelings or boundaries for anyone or anything. He was killing to figure himself out at the time, that's the only thing that crossed my mind as I tried not to grind my teeth. The anger that was coursing throughout my entire body was uncanny. I just wanted the corpse before me to no longer be intact. I wanted to know what it was like to see life fade from someone's eyes. The moment I saw his eyes dim out I had some kind of feeling, I can't really explain it but it made me want more. I felt empowered as someone else was taking control. The knife was no longer just an inanimate object, it had become a part of me. I put each severed body part in a trash bag, wrapped it up tight and put it in the trash can. Gary asked Dr. Anderson for a cigarette after he had finished telling such a gruesome tale. He needed a cigarette to calm his nerves. Reliving the past made him mad because he started to dwell on the fact that he was just an animal stuck in a cage. The only way to stop the whirlwind of thoughts that ran throughout his head was to kill again. Gary got his cigarette and smoked it slowly as if it was a joint. He inhaled deeply and blew out big clouds of smoke that traveled to Dr. Anderson's face. Dr. Anderson joined him as they took a break from the crazy story. No words were spoken, they just smoked 3 cigarettes each back to back. Their minds both had a blank slate, no thoughts existed between the both of them. When they finished smoking the time had come to break the awkward silence. Dr. Anderson had almost forgot that it was Gary's turn to ask a question. He was nervous because he had a feeling his questions were only going to become more personal. If he wanted to really get inside Gary's head, though, he had to just play the game. Gary, what happened to your wife? The question definitely struck a nerve, but he had to play it off like it didn't faze him. He just had to search within whatever was left of his soul and answer the question. Dr. Anderson, she was murdered. They never caught the killer. Does that satisfy you, asshole? Gary, easy, easy doctor. I didn't mean to piss me off. I didn't know. Gary knew that was a fucked up thing to ask, but he wanted the doc to lose his temper. If the doc lost his cool, then he would be vulnerable and hopefully confide more information to Gary. The doc caved pretty quickly and got hooked on the bait that I fed him. Now I needed him to divulge more details. Details that would allow him to lose his cool and look like an ass. If there was one thing I could tell from Dr. Anderson, it was that he hated being humiliated. He looked at me with such anger. Now I just had to roll with the punches and see where things went. Dr. Anderson leaned back in his black leather swivel chair and contemplated his next move. He realized that no matter what move he tried to think of next, Gary would always see it coming and counter it. He had this amazing ability to spin shit around and adapt easily. The deep-rooted question finally came to his wandering mind. I had to ask a question that would confuse him, a question that would prove that he was a real psychopath. Dr. Anderson, when did you realize that you were in love with your ex-girlfriend? Gary stared back at me emotionless. I unfortunately couldn't understand the question, nothing registered as he said that word. A word I thought I could experience, but it felt like I was unable to all my life. I never really had that feeling expressed towards me. Even if I did from past girlfriends, I don't remember feeling anything. I had to lie, but he would know if I was lying. Gary, what do you mean? Do you mean when did I know how I felt about her? Elaborate on the question, please. Dr. Anderson, I want to know what you felt when you were with her. Would you do anything for her? Inside Gary's scattered brain, thoughts scrambled to try and search for an adequate answer. An answer that would satisfy Dr. Anderson in his relentless quest to figure him out. A whole minute had gone by, and Gary's brain was unable to process the information effectively. He was unable to turn the tables because he never understood love. He never got it from his parents. Hell, he grew up in a war zone and survived. Success. His mind had finally clicked and came up with something to say. Gary, she was the only good in my life. Until I met her, I was dead inside. She made me feel alive. I would go to hell and back for her just to see her again. The answer had pleased me. I had a feeling that just because he was a maniac didn't mean that he didn't have a heart buried under the pain. Gary was so messed up in the head due to all the stress and trauma he had experienced from his dad. I believe that the blows he took from his father had altered his brain chemistry. How could he fall in love yet fake all these other emotions? There had to be some kind of soul and heart with feelings. I will not give up on him. I feel like I'm meant to help him. Something bigger is allowing us to connect. I needed more, I craved it, I wanted more. Stories of how he killed people and I didn't know why. Gary, do you enjoy listening to these stories of murder, and if so, why? I had to tell him the truth in order to gain more trust. And of course I needed more. Dr. Anderson, I'm interested in helping you only. Your stories are very fascinating and yes, I do enjoy listening to them. Dr. Anderson, tell me more and I'll let you have your cryptic journals back, a kill story for a notebook. Deal. There was no need to think, only do. I agreed, and I thought of a time when I got sloppy but still didn't get caught. Gary is around 21 at the time and he's at his house, sharpening his one and only companion. His double-bladed knife never looked so sharp and shiny. He held it in his hand and stared at it to gaze at its beauty. The blades shimmered from the reflection of his black lamp. He poked the points of both blades to test his work. Blood instantly dripped from his fingers. He licked his 2 fingers to taste his accomplishment. A twisted smile grew from ear to ear. I was about to go kill the one person that I always hated with every ounce of anger that was in me. My brother. It never crossed my mind until a couple of kills. I always wanted him to cease to be. Dr. Anderson, you have a brother? It doesn't say that in the file. Gary, I was adopted and so was that half piece of shit. He was my half-brother. Give me a fucking cigarette. Dr. Anderson realized that he had triggered a crucial detail that Gary was leaving out, so he gave in to his demand. He reached over the table where the pack of Marlboro Red 100s sat and took a cigarette out and threw it at Gary. Gary caught it with ease, lit it and inhaled deep. Dr. Anderson kind of regretted making Gary tick. He didn't know how he was going to make Gary calm again. A cigarette would only slow down the beast. Gary, I suppose you want to know why I hate my brother now, right? I had to be very careful on how I phrased my answer. And what kind of tact I used. Gary was extremely intelligent and would know if I was trying to bullshit him. My brain quickly formulated a tactic and I went with it. I went with it because it was the only thing that seemed smart at the time. Dr. Anderson, if you want to talk about it, Gary, I'm here for you. I believed him, I really believed the doc. I decided to tell him the whole truth. I don't know why, but I trusted him. Gary, I'll tell you what happened on one condition. And one condition only. Dr. Anderson, what is that? Gary, I want to know how your wife was murdered. But I want details. If I'm going to tell you everything that piece of shit did to me, I want to know what happened to your wife. We have a deal. Dr. Anderson, fine, let's smoke and I'll explain. Gary still had control, hell, he always had control of the situation. He just played it off as if Dr. Anderson had the upper hand. The two opposing forces smoked their cigarettes slow as they both contemplated their plan of attacks as if this was just a prolonged chess match. A beautiful young woman with black hair sits in her bathroom. She's combing her long straight black hair. As she gazes in the mirror before her, she's dressed in a tight short black dress. She finishes combing her hair and starts putting her crimson red lipstick on. As she focuses on putting her lipstick on perfectly, she jumps from a loud noise in the background. She gets up from her chair and walks towards the stairs to investigate the audible interruption. As she gets to the staircase, she stops at the edge and looks over to see the commotion. A strong force pushes her mid-back. She fell harder than a sack of potatoes. Once she reached the bottom of the stairs, her neck snapped like a twig. Her lifeless body was now contorted, but the person that pushed her was far from done. The tall figure, dressed in all black, slowly walked down the stairs to finish what he had started. He grabbed her by her long black hair and took out a knife. The knife cut into her throat slowly, blood flowed out and made a big blob on the once perfect wood. Gary, they never caught the son of a bitch. Dr. Anderson, no, there wasn't enough evidence. No hair follicles, no fingerprints, nothing. Gary, how does that make you feel, that the killer is still out there? Dr. Anderson didn't want to answer the question, but he had to. He was stalling and Gary was getting quite irate. I found myself questioning my strategies. My methods were only backfiring on me, so I thought to myself, what if I didn't use any more techniques or gimmicks? I needed to just compose myself and be real. For once, no more games or manipulative techniques. It would be more difficult to be truthful, but it was the only way to get what I wanted. The only thing that was on my mind as I stared at the doc was hate. I hated being locked up in this cage. I hated therapy, but the only thing I didn't hate was probing him and getting information out of him. Manipulating him was the only thing that kept me sane inside this cage. Dr. Anderson, I feel hopeless at times. It has been 2 years and there's not one single lead. How did you feel when your girlfriend died? The doctor didn't care anymore, he was going for the jugular. No feelings or thoughts were attached to his very blunt verbal attack. He was going for the kill. His intentions were entirely based on hurting Gary with everything he had left. Gary, before I answer your question, does it give you comfort hearing other people's stories of tragedy? Dr. Anderson, no, not at all. It gives me comfort helping people. Gary silently accepted the doctor's answer and started to think about how to answer the doc's question. He couldn't let Dr. Anderson know about his girlfriend's habit that began to become an addiction. A habit that he let grow and couldn't stop. Gary, I felt like going on a killing spree, and my thoughts of that soon became my worst nightmare. I acted out my thoughts to try and seek revenge, but the body count never mattered. There was a cockiness to Gary as he casually gave the doc an answer that would send shock to a normal person, but the doc was far from normal. You had to be a little crazy to go into psychology in the first place. The doctor remained stoic and started to jot down notes. Patient seems to be calm sometimes and extremely manic when he gets mad. We have made a deal and are now asking questions to each other. I Fear that he still or always had the upper hand. He thinks differently, it's almost as if he thinks 10 steps ahead. This is definitely all a game to him, he has no remorse what happens. I will continue to work with him, there has to be a way to reach him. Underneath his tough exterior and armor skin there was a person. The monster that killed only came out to persecute those that deserved it. I couldn't give up on him, I have to help him, it's not just my job. I saw something in him that was different from all the other psychopaths that I had worked with. Chapter 5, Love and Loss. Dr. Anderson and Gary were no longer concerned with making each other tick. Dr. Anderson truly wanted to help Gary, he had no desire for personal gain anymore. Dr. Anderson wanted to know more about Gary's past girlfriend. She had somehow left a stain on his heart which he didn't think was possible. Gary was a psychopath and psychopaths are incapable of love, they just weren't wired that way. It never hurt to ask, but he had no idea what he was getting into. Gary was a ticking time bomb, and if he kept pushing his buttons he would ignite and explode. Gary laid in his bed, staring at the ceiling. He didn't sleep well, and that was a bad thing for everyone around him. When Gary didn't sleep much he would be more manic than depressive. If you got in his way or even said something the wrong way, you better hope that something is in between the both of you. The buzzer disturbed Gary's thoughts. He jumped to his feet and walked towards the steel-reinforced door that kept him at bay. Behind the door was the only person that truly wanted to help him. Dr. Anderson nodded to the massive security guard sitting in his office. The door opened slowly as if Gary was an ancient artifact that was being sealed. The two walked back to the room in which secrets were told and deals were made. Dr. Anderson, morning Gary, what's on your mind today, did you sleep well? Gary sat there in his chair with his head down as if he was trying to draw attention. Attention was the worst weapon that he could use against you. A knife, axe or chainsaw could kill you once, but his words would kill you over and over again. Using the silent treatment is one of the worst things you can do to an individual. And Gary knew that. It eats them up inside and damages them mentally and emotionally if one could register feelings. Dr. Anderson, Gary, come on, don't be like this. I know what you're doing and I'm not going to fall for this bullshit tactic. Gary, I want what you promised me, I still have yet to receive one of my journals. Dr. Anderson, I'll give you a journal right now, but I want to know more of your ex-girlfriend. I think we made some progress in the last 2 days and I need to get to the root of why you snapped. You do realize they are thinking of giving you the chair, right? Gary, of course. I don't care anymore. Someone else will always come along and surpass my work. I just hope that they kill the right people. Dr. Anderson, I need to know more. Gary, are you game or not? Please don't waste my time. Gary, I told you I don't care anymore, so ask away. And I'll tell you everything you want to know. Dr. Anderson, what really happened to your ex-girlfriend? Gary, I want to know everything about her. And what led up to her death. I know you know the whole truth, I'm not stupid. I started to give the doctor more credit for actually being able to see past my facade. I knew he was smart. But I never realized he was capable of seeing the real me. Not only did he prove himself, but he was able to spin everything I said around too. It was beginning to get boring and I was losing interest in this whole thing. The only way to liven things up were to really tell him the truth about her. It was a touchy subject to me, but I grew weary of playing this cat and mouse game. The time had come to end it and start feeding the doctor the best medicine, truth. Gary, I'll tell you the truth, but it's not going to be easy to listen to, even for people like us. Dr. Anderson, what do you mean people like us? We are nothing alike. I could see it in Dr. Anderson's eyes that it was getting to him. He didn't like that comment one fucking bit. He cringed at the thought of ever being compared to me, and I had him where I wanted him now. Gary, it doesn't matter anymore, I'm going to talk about her. I hope you can handle everything I have to say. Words Gary spoke immediately made me feel like I was taken back to a time when Gary tried to love. It was winter once again, and the two lovers walked around the beautiful college campus. Snow fell all around them as they held hands and glanced at each other every now and then. Gary held Lisa's books as they walked to class. Gary was wearing a black hoodie with jeans, while the girl of his dreams was dressed in a white hoodie with jeans. He stopped by the hallway and pushed her up against the wall while he held her hands. His kisses were very passionate and full of force. And then he would slow down and bit her lip. She moaned in his ear as he continued to please her. He used his left hand to hold both of her skinny wrists together as he choked her with his right hand. The choking was good, but he had to switch it up. He loved to pleasure her. His right hand slowly went down underneath her pants. His fingers ravaged her clit and vagina quickly. She was taken back as her moans echoed throughout the hallway. Gary was just warming her up. He was far from pleasing his woman. After making her wet, he grabbed her hand and they walked together to find their sanctuary from the cold. The young couple sprinted together hand in hand until they reached her dorm room. Once they reached the front of her dorm room, he continued his foreplay. Gary pinned her up against the front door of her room and kissed her like it was their last kiss. He fingered her once again as he slowly opened the door with her key. They didn't bother turning on the lights as they stumbled to the bedroom. He pushed her down on her bed like she wasn't even there. Her face lit up with anger, but at the same time she wanted everything and anything that was about to be coming to her. Gary's right hand grabbed both of her wrists and held them down as he kissed and penetrated her with all the love he never knew he had for her or anyone. Audible moans filled the bedroom as Gary went faster and held her legs up. His big teeth grazed her collarbone as he bit and sucked her skin, leaving behind hickeys. Lisa's eyes rolled to the back of her head as she screamed. Yes. Gary was enjoying every minute of it too, but he was grunting as he continued to please her. He turned her around and started fucking her from the back, slowly until he got a fast rhythm. He held onto her hips as he slapped her ass with his right hand and sped up. His left hand got bored, so he reached over and choked her while he continued thrusting her hard. Her moaning got louder and louder as Gary had made her come several times. Gary flipped her over again on her back. He leaned over her and kissed her while looking into her eyes. Those 3 words uttered out of Lisa's mouth, 3 words that Gary had only heard of and seen in movies. I couldn't say it back. I felt something, but I just couldn't say it yet. Hell, I didn't even know what this feeling was that I was feeling. My chest felt warm and my thoughts had stopped running through my head. She calmed me like a drug. My anger ceased to exist as her eyes looked right through me and told me everything was going to be okay. That night we held each other for the rest of the night and fell asleep. Lisa's head laid upon Gary's chest, closing her eyes to the beat of Gary's heart. I decided to move in with her, but I never imagined that she would end up being my partner in crime. She eventually proved to be the most loyal person I had ever known. It all happened by accident, like everything else that's random in life. She caught me getting rid of a body once, and she was more intrigued about it all than shocked. She was so smart. She always knew I was up to something. Yeah, she knew that when I was quiet, I was thinking, or I was mad as hell. Dr. Anderson was on the edge of his chair as if he was watching a thriller or a really good horror movie. with multiple twists. He wanted more like a hardcore drug addict. He was getting addicted to his stories, but he didn't know if it was all true or not. The great doctor lit another cigarette, inhaled deep and slid another one to Gary. The beast that was opening up took his offer and took a hit. He inhaled deeper than the doctor and blew a massive cloud that covered the doctor's face. Once the smoke cleared, we were back in Gary's head again, back in the mind of a vigilante mass murderer. A portrait of a madman unfolds as Gary chops up another victim in his kitchen. Like an artist, he was focused on his work and didn't let distractions disturb his masterpiece. With a cleaver in his right hand, a black apron around him to shield himself from the blood, he worked diligently to separate the meat from the bones. Distinct sharp chops from the cleaver hitting his cutting board were like notes to Gary. Each chop was merely a part of his piece that he was creating. Slabs of meat were reduced to scraps that he nonchalantly threw in a trash can. I thought I was alone that day and had the whole dorm to myself, but Lisa came home unannounced. My hands were in a trance and I was almost done with my latest victim, but she stopped me. When I get in the zone, I listen to music with headphones and I didn't hear her. She tapped me on the shoulder and gave me the dirtiest look, as if I wasn't even there. I felt something once again. I can't explain what it felt like. My eyes tried to disarm her anger, but it wasn't anger at all. She was just speechless. I looked her in her left eye to make her more comfortable, but nothing worked. She saw past my bullshit psychological tricks. What unfolded next was something I had only dreamt about if I remembered my dreams back then. She probed me with questions, but not questions a rational person would ask. Lisa, when were you going to tell me that you're a fucking serial killer? Are you fucking eating the parts too, or what? Gary, wait, so you're only mad because I didn't tell you? You're not mad at what I do. Lisa, no, I'm mad, but I want to help you. I don't know why, but it fascinates me. At first I was stunned that she would actually be cool with what she witnessed. Yet, then again, she didn't see me originally kill the scraps of meat that were on my cutting board. I felt the feelings you talk about. I can't relate because I was thinking of what I needed, not what I wanted. She kept saying that she cared and that she wanted to see what I do and help, so I wanted her to join me and understand what it's like to hold the knife. Dr. Anderson, what did she do to help you achieve your goals, Gary? The answer to such a complex question came easy. It was the easy questions that were hard to answer. Gary, I don't know if I can confide that kind of information with you. Document. Dr. Anderson, why is that, Gary? Gary, first of all, stop mind-bending me with my first name. I'm not going to buy into your bullshit. Dr. Anderson hid his anger well, deep down inside. He took what Gary said to heart. The beast before him was somehow getting to him. A side of him that he thought he rid of, but it was beginning to surface. A moment of clarity hit me as I tried to calm myself down. I had a plan, but I had to execute it perfectly or Gary would be on to me. Dr. Anderson, it's unfortunate that you feel that way. But I'm not here to piss you off. I'm only here to try and understand you, and if I can help you along the way, then that's just merely a benefit. Gary really wanted to believe the words that were coming out of Dr. Anderson's mouth. The demon that controlled him wouldn't allow him trust anyone anymore. When the love of his life died, he hardened and grew even more bitter than before. She forever stained his heart, and he wouldn't stop until he was dead. Gary, no more questions. I want to finish my fucking story. We will see in the end if you can keep your word, or if they are as meaningless as this cell that holds me back. Gary's tone sent sharp tingles of pain that started from the bottom of the doctor's lower back until it hit the back of his head. He said it with such conviction and anger that the doctor was temporarily paralyzed with fear. A feeling that he had not felt in a long time. He had no choice at the time, for no thoughts really ran through his head. A blank slate that was almost similar to a calm after the storm took over him. An empty shell of a man just sat there and prepared to hear more of a gruesome tale that was unfortunately the truth. It wasn't the fact that all of it was true that scared the doctor, it was the fact that he was in the same room with the monster. Linda really loved me. I thought for sure that she would have left me, but she only wanted to learn more. She craved it like a kid wanting attention, she couldn't get enough, and I only wanted to give her more. We progressed as a couple in odd ways. I taught her how to properly hold a knife, but that wasn't enough. She kept probing me and flirting with me to get what she wanted. I couldn't resist. Her eyes always had a way of seeing right through me and making me listen to her. Eventually she had learned so much that she was ready to commit her first kill. She was nervous as hell. And it freaked me out. I was actually worried for once. I was worried because her nervousness would only lead to sloppy work. We paid attention to the news and tried to scout out her first kill. The night of the first kill was as brutal as waiting for her to get ready. When we would go out on dates, I had no patience to begin with, and I was getting weary of her dedication. She proved me wrong. Oh, did she prove me wrong? Every step of the way. Gary served as a distraction so his partner in crime could suffocate the problem with the justice system that roamed the streets. A poorly lit parking lot was not a planned location by any means, but it definitely gave us an advantage. Footsteps were silenced in the cold black night as she sprinted on her tiptoes to sneak up behind the bastard. The soon-to-be corpse was a piece of shit child molester. He had been acquitted of several cases against minor boys. The even bigger monster to me was the worthless judge that let him off over and over. We both dressed in all black as we stalked our prey like two wolves in the woods. Gary stood in the vacant parking lot pretending to fix his car to draw the animal near him. His car hood was up on his beautiful gun metal black Chevy Nova with two red stripes that went across the body. The animal walked from the gas station and slowly made his way to the supposed broken down Nova. As soon as he got to the front of the car, karma had finally caught up to him. The tight fish line that Linda wrapped around his neck left perfect lacerations that immediately made the bastard drop to his knees. Gary walked around his car and popped his trunk. The only thing in his trunk was a shiny steel axe that would sever the thin line between right and wrong. He picked up the axe and swung like he was going for a home run. The axe was a little dull and it got stuck halfway in between his neck as blood squirted out the right side of his neck. Blood splattered on Linda's black hoodie, but it didn't faze her. She continued helping her man. Another hard swing and his head would be no more. Gary pulled all the way back as if he was about to hit a golf ball 250 yards. He put so much force behind the swing that the animal's head rolled after it had hit the ground. I was impressed with her strength. She was able to bring him to his knees and set up the decapitation flawlessly. Now, normally I would just burn the rest of the body and call it a day because the bastard had already been decapitated, but she had other plans. She wanted to take things to the next level, and as much as I wanted to participate, I was more interested in watching her work from a distance. The creativity behind such a morbid angel was amazing to watch. I felt honored to see such a genius at work. Little hands cut into a corpse so diligently, it was like watching a surgeon on the operating table. I never gave her pointers along the way. She handled it like a pro. Linda's hands were rapidly working towards the end of her masterpiece. She was creating something the world would never understand. That something was of course insane to society, but to her it was peace and salvation. All she wanted to do was rid the world of the wrong that was set free because of money. They were set free from a thing that wasn't real in the first place, as if a wave of the hand made the pain disappear. Her skills were far more advanced than I had thought. I only showed her the way, but she flourished and created her own path with such little guidance. At the time it was a turn on, but now I realize that I should have stopped her, but it's too late to dwell on the past. The past brings no pleasure, only pain, but then again it isn't affecting you now, so you can move on. And that's the only thing you can do, is move forward. Or let it consume you. The only thing that was really affecting Gary at the time was the fact that he wasn't able to control her. She was walking all over him, and the demons that were keeping him alive were not going to let that continue. She was only creating her own demise. It was only a matter of time before the demons within Gary unleashed the fire they kept at bay. Dr. Anderson, did you ever try to stop her? Gary, let me finish my story first and then you can ask questions. I'm far from done. The madness that she possessed was already there, I only showed her the way. Up until that point I had lived my life with no regrets. She made me regret a lot of things that I never thought I would ever care about. What she did to the rest of that bastard's corpse was shocking to me. Once again little hands work over a headless corpse. As a lamp served as the only source of light. She took every vital organ out and placed them upon my table. Her hands unraveled the large intestines as she was creating something unusual, but I liked it. I had to admire her work. I only taught her how to cut. Looking at her finished masterpiece where the human body was the painting astounded me. I studied it and realized that she had already surpassed me in such little time. Her work was different though. I never went that far to display such a disturbing scene. Linda had managed to connect the intestines to each vital organ. The heart started the piece and connected to the liver, kidneys and spleen. That was her trophy. She was very prideful as she hung it up to praise it. I hate to admit it, but she scared me a little bit, and nothing fucking scared me. I had to stop her, but that would mean that I was going to have to kill her. I couldn't just break up with her. She knew too much, and if she wanted to, she could totally rat me out. I would have to plan my attack and kill her when she least expected it. A part of me had feelings for her. The demon kept my feelings for her at bay. Demon, you are so stupid, you are jeopardizing our entire cause. Did you fucking forget what we are doing? I tried so hard to ignore it, but it was too overpowering. The voice got me this far, it was loyal. And was always right. It told me to strike when her back was turned during our next kill. I had no choice but to listen. He would never betray me. A crimson red moon lit up the night as we killed one last time together. It was another child molester that had been let loose into the world. The act of killing her would have been easy if I didn't have feelings for her. Dr. Anderson thought about it in deep contemplation. He tried to comprehend how a psychopath like Gary could actually develop feelings for her. Usually a psychopath couldn't fall in love that easily. Sure, there had been cases, but it was very rare. They didn't register feelings in their brains like we did. Their brains were wired differently. The kill was supposed to be so simple, but things got complicated and I had failed in my attempts to kill her. This particular victim wouldn't go down easily. He put up a good fight. I was impressed by the strength of such a weak-minded individual. The beautiful red moon reflected off of my 6-inch double blade as I stabbed the bastard in the throat. I twisted it and pulled it out to make the blood drench. Blood soaked all over his preppy pink shirt that he had used to attract little boys. He immediately grabbed his throat as if he had a chance to survive. I was done. After that I had no intentions of taking it further, but she was out of control. She wouldn't obey my orders. As the bastard still fought back as he was bleeding out, With the last of his strength he lunged at me, trying to take the knife away from me. I grabbed his wrist and pierced the middle of his hand. The knife went all the way through effortlessly. I always took good care of my tools. Before and after every kill I always sharpened and cleaned them. The once breathing child molester dropped to his knees and tried to put pressure on his throat. Choking on his own blood, I saw his worthless life dim out like a light. His corpse fell face first on the parking lot parking divider. The impact split his skull open down the middle of his forehead. I was done. I wouldn't have taken it further until we got back home. She, on the other hand, had other plans for his full intact body. That was the only time that I had an opening to attack. It was now or never. She walked around the dead victim and stomped his head on the curb over and over. A river of blood oozed out of his cracked skull. I snuck up behind her and did the worst thing I could possibly imagine. I pulled out my soon-to-be only friend left. He helped me say goodbye to a twisted love. A love that would probably end up betraying me. And I couldn't take that risk anymore. I cut into her throat as if I was carving a 30-pound turkey. With every stroke I could feel myself slowly detaching myself from her. No longer would I have these feelings for her. At least that's what the plan was and what I had thought at the time. Life really is a bitch, like they say, and I was experiencing true love for once and I killed it. I was so mad at the time that apparently I almost cut through the bone of her neck. The forensic team analyzed it and said they had never seen such force with just a knife. That was it. That's all that happened with her. Dr. Anderson, what did you do with the rest of the body? I remember reading the report and they never found the rest of the body. Gary, it's not your turn, it's mine. A big smirk grew on Dr. Anderson's face. He had forgotten that they had to take turns. Chapter 6, The Doc. The questioning had ended for that day. Gary leaned back in his chair as if he was pretending to think of a question. Gary, what was your childhood really like? Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson leaned back in his chair and stretched his arms while he popped his knuckles. He didn't want to open up about his rough childhood. It was something that he never wanted anyone to know about, for he had deep dark secrets that no one should ever know. Secrets that would even stun Gary. The only way he could possibly open up to a psychopath is fall victim to him. He had to tell him everything, or the whole bond that he had worked hard for would be lost. Dr. Anderson, you're about to open a door that will be very difficult to close, but I will tell you everything. I just want one promise. Gary, what is your promise? Dr. Anderson, you never tell anyone, not one single fucking soul. As the great doc told him his conditions, he pointed to Gary as if threatening him. Gary never flinched or moved as the doc tried to intimidate him. Inside he was laughing his ass off, but his beautifully twisted mind wouldn't allow the emotions to register. Gary's right hand moved fast and grabbed the doctor's fingers and bent them back as he leaned over and looked him in the eyes. Gary, don't ever fucking try to intimidate me. You have only bits and pieces of who I truly am. Remember that you're only alive because killing you would be too easy and wouldn't solve anything. Dr. Anderson's anger only grew, but he kept it inside. He had to continue his work or all of his efforts would have been meaningless. He only had one choice, and that was to let it go. His thoughts now consisted of searching his memory bank for the where to start. He had a past so dark that he had repressed the memories for years. The horrible acts that his father had done to him and the pain that he had only led him to become an animal. A young Dr. Anderson plays with his Ninja Turtles and organizes them in a perfectly placed collage. He would see the original design in his head and then create it. In the background his mom is yelling at his dad once again. It's nothing new, the same old routine. Dad goes out, comes home drunk and then has to deal with his wife that is nagging him to death. Only on that particular night when I was only 4 years old I remembered why I hated my father. The two opposing forces continued their yelling match, but my dad decided to take it to the next level. My mom egged him on, telling him how to act and pushing his buttons by pointing at his chest. My drunken father could only take so much and continued to tell her to stop, but it only made matters worse. He cocked back, twisting his torso, and unleashed a full force slap. The force behind the slap was powerful but only aggravated my mom. She was tough as nails. So, instead of walking away, the bastard had other plans. He grabbed my mom by her hair and literally dragged her down the stairs like a caveman. Her head knocked on the wooden staircase. I can still remember hearing it from upstairs all the way on the other side of the house. The knocks sent tingles down my spine. I vowed that day in my head to never be like him and to never forgive him either. He wasn't better than me by any means. Only my thoughts were not strong enough for me to actually obey as I got older. Gary, that's pretty fucked up, man, but it's not like you were abused or anything. You only saw violence. It's not the same. Sometimes I'd forget that the asshole sitting across from me had no empathy at all, but then again deep down inside I envied that trait he had. Who the fuck wants to feel sorry for such things, or have feelings when you commit inhumane acts upon your own species? I didn't want to say anything, so I continued telling my sad but true childhood. I had to tell him about the time I almost killed my father. Maybe that would put him at ease about whose side I'm really on. Dr. Anderson is around 22 years old and still living at home with his parents. At that time in my life I had been through a lot of shit, dropped out of college, got hooked on heroin for 2 years and quit cold turkey. I had a little bullshit job, but it all went to my dad because he got laid off. Out of respect though, he bought me things I needed to get by: cigarettes, a 6-pack of beer, and anything else my heart desired. I didn't mean to give him a concussion, but that's what happens when you mess with the bull. You always get the fucking horns. He came home and demanded the paycheck, but I kept telling him that I already gave it to him. But that's what happens when you drink too much every day. You have memory gaps like you were snorting meth for years. He still wasn't buying the truth, and I could only close him on it if he was sober. He staggered to my room like a drunken T-Rex because my dad was always pretty big for only being 5'9". He was 250 pounds. But he was fucking strong. In the history of arm wrestling and boxing I had only beat him once. That night was definitely one for the history books. I had never struck my dad with open fists, and that night he made me the Hulk, and there was no turning back, no matter what. If there's one thing that I have learned, it's that money can never buy back time that other friends have said they did with their dad. I didn't have a real dad. I had a drunk genius child that I had to babysit. I was around 22 to 23. I was still in school, but still trying to make up my mind as far as what field of psychology I wanted to go into. At first clinical interested me, but then I realized it would be too boring. I wanted something more. I wanted to work with bad people and try to fix them. Maybe it was the fact that I didn't really know myself too, but something deep down inside me called me to helping others. My dad had come home drunk once again, like I had said earlier. He was extremely belligerent this time. He tried to order me around as if he were a general. My dad knew me better than that. He knew that the last time he tried bossing me around, I kicked a glass patio door so hard in the middle that it got stuck. The bastard had to hire 2 people to fix it. That was only one of many stories of my anger and why he would always call me dangerous. The yelling wasn't really belittling to me, it was just annoying. You have to understand that I grew up in a fucking war zone. There is little that actually phases me. That night was different though. I had already drank a 6-pack of 8% beer before my dad had barged in the front door. He yelled at the top of his lungs, shouting my name. I calmly went to the kitchen and poured a double shot of Jaeger that I had bought from saving money here and there. I slammed it back and took it like a champ. He stood before me, face to face, eye to eye, breathing heavy as if he was going to hit me. Dad, where's the fucking rent money, asshole? You see, my dad had been on a big drinking binge for a week. Usually he would take breaks, but this asshole had a death wish or something. He was so fucked up all the time that he totally forgot that I had already gave him the money. He was so bad of a drunk that he would constantly forget shit and confuse days. I could smell the liquor and beer on him. He fucking reeked like a brewery. I could only take so much as he kept pushing me. He thought it was funny, but it was only allowing my anger to explode on a whole new level of rage. A rage that could have killed him, but my mom stopped me. The drunken madman pushed me into the dining room table so hard I fell onto the glass table. That was the last straw. As I got back up quickly, the beer aided my fast recovering and allowing me to feel no pain. I tripped him by putting my legs behind his body and pushed him with all my weight using the left side of my body weight. He fell slowly on the tile and immediately grabbed his head, but he was only feigning injury. I got on top of him and punched him with fists of fury. He attempted to block my blows to his face, but I was too mad. There was no stopping my hatred towards him that I had reserved for this moment. My mom at first egged me on, but then after she saw blood coming out of my dad's nose and mouth, she repeatedly yelled at me to stop. I finally stopped after my mom's yelling registered in my brain. I took a step back and walked away from my dad's bloody face. My dad was so fucking bombed that all of that didn't even hurt him. I retreated to my room and took deep breaths to calm my nerves. Adrenaline had ran rampant throughout my body and I had to chill out or I would probably have a panic attack. I heard stumbling in the hallway as my father obliviously navigated his way to my room. He kissed me on the forehead and told me he was proud of me. I asked him why, and he replied with, "You finally stood up to me." I retorted with, "I shouldn't have to, you're my father, it's not the other way around." He walked away while holding a bag of ice on his head. "Gary, wow," and I thought my life was fucked up. Gary said it in a sarcastic tone. Dr. Anderson ignored his patient's comment and continued with his childhood, if that's what society would even call it. I decided to ignore his rude comment. It only displayed his total disregard towards other people. The only wise option at this juncture in time was to continue my story. After me and my father had basically ended our war, he knew and I knew that we would always keep our distance. Eventually I moved out on my own and never went back, not even to visit. And I never called. I completely cut off all communication with them. Unfortunately, my anger still existed inside of me. It was an anger that was from my father and anger from other events I will not discuss. They passed away when I was 25 and I miss my mom and even my dad in a weird love/hate kind of way. If those events never conspired, then I truly believe I wouldn't be the person I am today. On his own, we see a different side of Dr. Anderson. He's sitting in his room reading the Myers-Briggs Diagnoses and Statistics Manual. As he's reading, he's taking notes in a black leather-bound notebook. To someone who didn't know him, they were just basic notes. What he was really doing was taking factual information and seeing how he could improve on old tactics and make things run smoother. I used to study on my own just to learn everything I could, the good and the bad of psychology. It was like my new religion. I wanted to know all of it. I grew bored and weary of just reading and taking notes. My ADHD kicked in and I needed to actually test the things that I had learned. Gary, that's your dark past that you tried to hide so well. Gary chuckled audibly. A blank slate occupied Dr. Anderson's face as he stared at Gary. I continued to ignore him to show him a little disrespect and let him know who was really in control of the conversation. The thing about a lot of serial killers is that they love attention, and if I denied him that, then he would crave it. It was similar to what Ivan Pavlov did when he was training dogs. You must use positive and negative rewards to train someone. Only it would be extremely difficult because Gary was pretty fucking smart. Dr. Anderson continued telling his story of how he became who he was today. I found it hard not to lie to him, and even though I knew what he was inside his demented and sick brain, I couldn't stop feeding him information. He was definitely a textbook psychopath. But it seemed like there was something more to him. That something was the only thing that I wanted to figure out. I could care less about him as an individual. For I knew that therapy never worked on psychopaths. You can't change what you were hardwired with. Chapter 7, Time for Action. I was getting bored and needed to test what I had learned. It was my own way of seeing if I was able to retain all the information and use it. Dr. Anderson decided to head to the bar scene and see if he could bring home a beautiful woman to prove his theory. He walked into a dim-lit bar with literally only about 5 people. A gorgeous brunette stood out from the handful of people. She was wearing a bright red seductive dress and her hair had big curls. I couldn't help myself as I continued to stare at her. She had the most enchanting eyes I had ever seen. They were 2 perfect shades of blue and green. I walked over to her and sat down. She was in her own little world and played hard to get at first, but that would soon be a thing of the past. My charm turned on and I had her laughing and smiling from ear to ear. I just complimenting her dress and her smile. The main thing I was doing too was listening, instead of talking her head off. I was kind of lost though, I didn't know what I really wanted from her. I felt like she wasn't really a person, she was too easy to convince to come home with me. The whole game leading up to her coming home wasn't really fun. I took her to my pad and decided to do more than just have sex with her. Gary, what did you do, Doc? Did you actually make out with her, or let me guess, you made her dinner? Chuckled, once again the well-composed doctor ignored him and continued talking. I wasn't going to let that piece of shit get the best of me. I had anger deep down inside growing, but I kept it buried under layers of reinforcement. After we got back to my place, we kept the party going and did multiple shots together. Now was the time to see if any of what I had learned was going to pay off at all. I started asking her to do stuff to see if she'd obey. I started asking her to do sexual favors. It was almost too easy. Thoughts of taking advantage of her never crossed my mind. I never cared at all. I saw her as just an object and nothing more. I made her undress and finger herself, while I just watched, but it did nothing for me. I needed more. I wanted to inflict pain upon her, but sexually, and I didn't know why, it just crossed my mind at the time. I wanted her to feel the emptiness I had inside. She never questioned anything, I knew she wouldn't either. Psychology had taught me a lot, and one of the main things was that, if someone is very attracted to someone, they will do what they want. As she continued to please herself, my mind raced, thinking of things I could do to her to please myself. I told her to go to my bedroom and undress. I went to my closet and grabbed a couple of things, handcuffs, a black mask and a handheld camera. My intentions were not even to have her please myself. I wasn't turned on at all by the thought of her pleasing me. I wanted something different. I wanted her to feel the pain and emptiness I kept inside. Gary, I thought I was the sick fuck doc. I got to the point where I could just phase Gary out by not acknowledging what he said. Even though he was a true psychopath, I knew that it affected him. I had finally figured out his patterns. When he was mad, he would shut up, but at the same time, him not talking was not a good thing. His silence meant that he was thinking, and the thoughts that truly lurked in his head were probably unimaginable. He was no dummy. He scored a 184 on his IQ test. He knew how to spin anyone around and make them feel like shit, but not me. Dr. Anderson continued talking and telling more of his experimenting days. After I had all the tools I needed, I handcuffed her to my bedpost, put the black mask on her and commanded her to relax. She was now spread eagle, completely naked except for the mask that occupied her face. 2 sets of handcuffs were securely latched onto the bedposts. There was no way she was going to be able to escape. There were no thoughts that were in my mind as to whether this was wrong or right. I merely acted upon impulse. None of this was planned. I was dangerously sporadic. I went back in the closet and grabbed my tripod stand and placed it in front of the bed. The young and curious Dr. Anderson wanted to stimulate himself. He didn't care about his victim before him. He truly only got into psychology to help and please himself. He never cared about curing anyone. I undressed and crawled on the bed like a lion about to eat its prey. She pretended to be in danger by trying to break free from the metal that restrained her. She tried to scream, but her mouth had a red ball in it. I began to tease her by just rubbing the lips of her clit. She started moaning, but it definitely wasn't audible. Her head tilted back from the pleasure. While I fingered her and rubbed her clit, I started using the power of my tongue. I switched it up and went slow, then speed it up and went fast to let her climax and come down. She had the best of both worlds, an upper and a downer mixed together. I got off a little bit, but it still didn't satisfy what I really wanted to do. What I really wanted to do wouldn't be perceived as sane. People would definitely judge me if they found out. I didn't care. I wanted my fantasies and what I had learned to play out perfectly. I was in control, and I couldn't let anyone or anything get in the way of my vision. Boredom kicked in and I switched it up after making her come several times just by fingering her. I went down on her until my jaw got sore. She moaned constantly, but it was still silenced by the red gag ball that I put in her mouth. I took the ball out and she smiled and told me to give it to her. I fucked her butt slowly to tease her and just give her a sample of what was to come. Only I knew that I had other intentions. Intentions that were darker than what a normal mind could contemplate. I proceeded to unlock the demons that plagued my mind that I kept hidden for years. They took over my body and mind and did what they wanted to do. I lost my controlled behavior to the deep-seated demons that always lived inside of me. Dr. Anderson stopped talking out of the blue and just put his head down and closed his eyes. He reached for a cigarette from his pack and lit one and slid the pack and lighter to Gary. Gary picked up the pack, lit his smoke and took a deep hit. He was stumped as to why the omnipotent doctor just stopped dead in his tracks. A big mushroom cloud came out of Gary's mouth as he was buying time to word his many thoughts. Gary, you stopped because you had feelings for this girl. Did you kill her, Doc? Dr. Anderson, I don't want to do this right now. Our session for today is over unless you want to tell me where you buried the other bodies that the police can't find. Gary, good effort buddy, but you forget I'm a master manipulator, not a pathetic shrink like you. Don't ever try to bullshit me again. I wrote the fucking book on bullshit, you understand? Gary slammed his handcuffed fists upon the table so hard the table shook and it startled Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson wasn't going to take Gary's shit anymore, so he decided to show Gary he wasn't playing around. He pushed a red button under his side of the table. Two big 6-foot giants rushed in immediately to try and tame the beast. Gary stood up from the table and pushed the table towards Dr. Anderson as hard as he could. He needed a dramatic exit, so his brain went into overtime to concoct one. He had been planning his escape since he got there. That was a major difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. A sociopath is totally sporadic and a psychopath plans kills out and executes them without leaving a trace that he or she was there. Gary was definitely a psychopath and he was about to execute his every desire to escape the vacation he had been on. The awesome and brutal force from him pushing the table into Dr. Anderson's solar plexus knocked him out instantly. He passed out and fell to the floor like a 10-pound bag of potatoes. Gary ran towards Dr. Anderson's unconscious body and picked him up. Before picking him up, he checked his pockets and took his pen. He was getting out of there, one way or another. The security guards were almost in the interview room as Gary used Dr. Anderson's pen to hold Dr. Anderson hostage. The pen was pressed hard into the jugular of Dr. Anderson as he walked slowly out of the door. The guards backed off slowly as they complied with Gary's orders. "Gary, back off, back the fuck off, I'll do it, I swear. To your God, I will do it." Gary made it this far, waiting for the right moment to spring his trap upon the one who held him captive. His trap had been set since the day he had accidentally slipped up and got caught. He wanted to learn about the doctor, he wanted to see if he could escape. Another great treat of being a psychopath. They are so calculating that you never see it coming. You never see it coming because you least expect them to be a killer. With all of his gears now set in motion and now the wheel was turning once again, he felt satisfied for the time being. Victory would be his, but he didn't know if he wanted to keep Dr. Anderson with him or not. "Gary, if you send any motherfuckers after me, they are getting it too. I'm not afraid to end his life." The guards kept their distance and allowed Gary to leave the prison in Dr. Anderson's car. A beautiful black new Mercedes speeds out of the prison. Dr. Anderson's body was still unconscious and now inside the trunk of his own car. I didn't have any time to restrain him, but I was able to unlock my handcuffs by taking the keys from the guard. I was being sloppy at this point because I had no idea where I was going to go and what I was going to do with the great doctor in the back. Finally my brain went into creative mode and I saw the whole picture without even really trying. I felt like there might be a greater purpose to why I have the doctor in my trunk. There had to be a reason. Things always happen for a reason, or so my demons always thought. I didn't speed, due to the fact that they would definitely send a manhunt of cops after me. It was around 6 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun was setting beautifully. Bright red and orange clashed together to form the background of such a dramatic and glorious achievement for Gary. I never had much faith in cops anyway. I remember when I was younger, I stole my neighbor's car and it was also a black Mercedes. I literally drove next to a cop that was probably looking for me, but I was never caught by the cops. The neighbors finally caught me. Then again, I was young and naive. I wanted to get caught. I loved the attention back then and I guess I still do now, but I don't want to be confined in a fucking cell for the rest of my days. Gary had taken Dr. Anderson's wallet. He was going to have to hide out at a hotel. He was going to have to use whatever cash was in there. If he used the credit card, then they would be able to trace him and find him easily. Luckily, Dr. Anderson had $250 $5 in his wallet for some odd reason. He kept driving, heading towards the ghetto. The sunset slowly faded into a pitch-black night as I made it to my destination. The hotel was a hole in the wall, the paint was a brown color that symbolized the shit that I had been through. It was a perfect place to gather all my thoughts that raced through my head faster than a Formula One car. Dr. Anderson was still sound asleep. From the metal table force, Gary got out of the car and paid for the hotel. He didn't have time to put Dr. Anderson in his room. There were too many witnesses all around. He had to wait until it got darker and there wasn't a soul in sight. Nighttime finally came around and it was time to check on the great doctor. Gary opened the trunk slowly and peeked in the trunk. A kick to the face was all that he remembered. Dr. Anderson wasn't going to go down without a fight. He had woken up a long time ago on the drive. He had reserved all his energy for this perfect moment in time to strike back. Gary fell backwards and hit his head hard on the parking lot street. As he held the back of his head, Dr. Anderson knelt down on his knees in search for the keys to unlock his handcuffs. With his hands still handcuffed, he swiftly dug through Gary's pockets and found the key. He got back up on his feet and unlocked the handcuffs as humanly quick as possible. Once the handcuffs were no longer locked, he took them and handcuffed Gary and picked him up. Gary resisted at first by moving his whole torso as if that would actually accomplish anything. He then gave up, realizing that he was strong, but not strong enough to break free from the handcuffs. Dr. Anderson led him to the hotel and grabbed the room keys from Gary. I didn't want to plan my escape again. I had a proposition for Dr. Anderson. A proposition that would benefit both of us. Dr. Anderson, why are you all quiet now? Because you're mad? Thought you were supposed to be some kind of badass, but all I see right now is a little baby. A little baby that didn't get his way and he is throwing a fit or is about to throw a big one. Gary, I'm not mad yet, you'll know when I'm mad. I was mad, but we're not in that fucking cell anymore. Are we? Dr. Anderson, okay, get on with it. What is your deal that you propose? Gary, wow, you are good, doc. Maybe you really could have helped me become a model citizen. Chuckles. Even Dr. Anderson laughed with Gary. The two have spent enough time together to get to know each other. They had become more comfortable, but yet they were still not friends.